Hi folks, I want to go over all things Todd Click. His testimony from the recent court hearing is out and I have it broken down a little, which I hope will make things easy to understand. This is my third video on Todd Click's testimony from the recent court hearing, and I think trying to find out what he said is a sign of things to come with Richard Allen's trial if it's not streamed. I don't think there's any malice behind anyone who was in attendance and took notes and got information wrong. It's very difficult to get it right. Thank God this transcript came out. We won't get transcripts like this when the trial is happening, and it's going to be mayhem trying to figure out the exact words of what was being said. My own thoughts on what happened at the hearing by compiling everyone's notes together were very far from the reality of the situation. Once I read the official transcript, I had a completely different take and understanding of what went down. The quote that you were seeing on your screen from Todd Click, I think is very important. Allen's defence team have been slated in some corners for the Odinism angle. People saying they pull things from their arse, they got stuff off lunatic YouTubers, and they took Todd Click's words out of context. And I know this is a hard pill for some people to swallow, but the facts are, long before any attorney knew of Richard Allen, there was investigators on this case not only investigating the Odinism angle, but they believed there was something there. One still does, one is dead, and I don't know what the other guy is up to. It's also my first video really mentioning a lot of the people that are mentioned here. I've never mentioned them, but I've still been accused on this channel of pushing the Odinism angle somehow. This is the first time I'm mentioning a lot of them, and the words aren't from my mouth, it's coming from Todd's testimony, so please keep that in mind. And the majority of this video is going to be that. It's not going to be my words or my thoughts, it's just going to be Todd Click's words. What a police officer of 20 years testified to in court and what he will testify to at Richard Allen's trial. So this video is going to go over Todd Click's testimony from March 18th when there was a hearing for Richard Allen's defence team motion to dismiss for destroying exculpatory evidence, i.e. Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall's interviews. Patrick Westfall's interview was never recorded, but Brad Holder's was. I won't be talking about it in this video, but if you are wondering why Francis Gull denied this, please have a read of Stephen Mullins. He was the Delphi Chief of Police in 2017. He also testified on March 18th. And if you read his testimony, you will see why Judge Francis Gull easily denied this. There's 14 points in total that this video will be covering. I'm going to start with offers of proof and Baldwin's offer of proof. Who is Todd Click? Why he stopped working on the case? What was his involvement in the Delphi case? Ties and connections that Todd Click uncovered between Elvis Fields and Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall. Jonny Messer recruiting for the Vinlanders. More ties and connections Todd Click uncovered. Jonny Messer's ex-girlfriend Taylor and the kidnapping video. Elvis Fields' sister Joyce. Elvis Fields' comments about his spit. Elvis Fields' sister Mary. Todd Click's actions following Richard Allen's arrest. Todd Click's meeting with Holeman and Detective Vido in August 2023. And last but not least, Jonny Messer's ex-girlfriend Alycia and the Goldilocks cell phone. I'm going to start with the offer of proof. This came at the end of the hearing when Baldwin was not allowed to go any further. Nothing in the offer of proof was actually testified to on the day. And if you don't know what an offer of proof is, basically what it is, if a judge doesn't allow certain testimony in, attorneys are allowed to put in an offer of proof. This is just to get it on the record in case there's an appeal down the road. I don't think that's the case here. I think they used the offer of proof just to get information out to the public. Andy Baldwin was going very far away from the interview in 2017, trying to lay foundation and add context around it. And Judge Gull did let him go a bit far, but she reined him in at the end, and because she reined him in, he put in an offer of proof. This is what he said. He's talking about Brad Holder's 2023 interview with the Indiana State Police. Remember, they lost his 2017 interview and they called him back in August for another interview. Richard Allen's defence team now have that interview, and they showed it to Click to get his opinion on it. And when you consider the information that Todd Click had provided the prosecution, there's no excuse for some of these questions not to be put to Brad Holder in 2023. So Todd Click met with the prosecution team, and he gave them everything he had. He told them his opinions and his thoughts. They then met with Brad Holder, and Brad Holder was never asked a single question about Elvis Fields. He was never asked a single question about Jonny Messer. He was never asked a single question about what his ex-wife Amber Holder said. She said that Brad Holder confessed that Patrick Westfall was involved in the crime and was involved in the murders, that Brad Holder was scared of Patrick Westfall. He also stated in his 2023 interview that he only met Abby one time, but in his 2017 interview, the notes from that, he said that he never met her. In his 2023 interview, he was also not asked about why he and Patrick were no longer friends. They didn't even bother asking. His ex-wife, Amber, is going to testify that it had something to do with a ritual gone wrong in a forest by a river. So that was the offer of proof that came at the end when Baldwin was not allowed go any further. He will be allowed to get into that stuff at a trial. Everything else in this video is now Todd Click's testimony. So who is Todd Click? Before I get into what he said at the March 18th hearing, I want to play you a clip from 5 years ago from an interview with Todd when he was running for sheriff, just to give you an idea of his background, what he looks like, what he sounds like.
We have Mr. Todd Click. When I was detective, I received an extensive amount of training, mainly focusing in on forensic computer investigations, death investigations, homicide investigations, robbery investigations. I was an investigator for the Indiana Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. A lot of those investigations were not only done here in Rushville, but the southeastern part of Indiana. A lot of child molest, child exploitation cases. I went through a week-long training in St. Louis, Missouri on suspicious death and homicide investigations. Received some training from some of the top homicide investigators in the United States. And then when I became assistant chief, gears kind of switched a little bit, and a lot more human resource training, internal affairs investigations training, things of that nature. When I graduated high school from Rushville in 1991, I went to Vincennes University for law enforcement. I left Vincennes and did not graduate with a degree. That was something that kind of stuck in my crawl for most of my life, just because it was something that I had tried to obtain and didn't finish.
I understand that.
So then I was always one that I've always kind of strived to always improve myself. So when I became assistant chief, I decided that it was that time for me to go back and finish out my degree. So along with a full-time job and full-time family duties, I was enrolled as a full-time student with Liberty University, and I graduated with honors and obtained a bachelor's degree in criminal psychology.
Good for you. Congratulations.
This is what Todd said at the March 18th hearing in regards to the Delphi investigation. I provided investigative assistance to two other detectives, Detective Greg Ferenczi, who was a Terre Haute police officer with and also an FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force member, and Detective Kevin Murphy, who was Indiana State Police Detective, who was also an FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force member. He said it was the belief of Detective Murphy, Detective Ferenczi, and him that there was a strong likelihood that Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall and Elvis Fields had a strong involvement in the murders of the girls. He said his investigation came to an end when Detective Ferenczi was shot and killed in the line of duty. So he was working on this case for just under 3 years. He said in June 2018, Detective Ferenczi and Detective Murphy came to Rushville to conduct an interview with a gentleman by the name of Elvis Fields. This is what he said. In June of 2018, Detective Ferenczi and Detective Murphy came to Rushville to conduct an interview with a gentleman by the name of Elvis Fields. They asked to use our interview room at the Rushville Police Department. They asked me if I would be willing to operate the equipment for them. They asked me if I was familiar with Elvis Fields, to which I was. They asked if I kind of would watch the interview and give my opinion on what. And Andy Baldwin said, kind of a hometown opinion of, he says, yes. Todd goes on to say, so after that, Detective Murphy and Detective Ferenczi told me they were looking at a couple of individuals from the Delphi area. Andy Baldwin asks, who are they? Todd says they were Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall. He said they asked me if I could help maybe try and find a tie between Elvis Fields and Mr. Holder and Mr. Westfall. And he did. He found a number of them. I'll go through all the ones we know of so far here. He said while reviewing some photographs on Brad Holder's Facebook page, he located a photograph with approximately 5 individuals and they were all wearing Vinlander t-shirts. He explains that they are a group that practices Norse and paganism religion, kind of along the Viking culture. He said, in those photos, I identified Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall, and there was a gentleman standing in between the two of them that I immediately recognised as Jonny Messer. Andy Baldwin asks him how he knows Jonny Messer, and he says Jonny Messer is from Rushville. He had been arrested numerous times by the Rushville Police Department, so I was very familiar with Jonny. He also goes on to say he knew from previous incidents that Jonny Messer's uncle, Billy Messer, used to live with Elvis Fields. So very quickly, Todd is making a lot of ties and connections. He says, I contacted Detective Ferenczi and Detective Murphy and told them specifically to look at that photo, and the individual standing in between Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall was Jonny Messer, who was an individual from Rushville. He said after that, he knows that Detective Ferenczi and Detective Murphy came down to Rushville and they conducted an interview with Jonny Messer and several other interviews with people that Jonny Messer knew. He said he specifically asked Jonny if he had tried to recruit anyone else from Rushville area to be part of his Vinlander group. He denied that he did. He then said, I conducted several other interviews of people that I knew were connected to Jonny Messer, and those individuals told me that Jonny had tried to recruit them to the Vinlander group. So that's Jonny recruiting people for the Vinlander group in Rushville. He said after conducting that interview, we also conducted an interview with Taylor, who was an ex-girlfriend of Jonny Messer's, and she provided very useful information. She was able to provide photographs of Jonny Messer, Patrick Westfall, Brad Holder, several other individuals that the photographs were taking during club meetings or outings that the Vinlander group conducted. He also looked at some photographs on Elvis Fields' Facebook page and Brad Holder's Facebook page. He said there was pictures of sticks that were placed in different arrangements. I know that there was like a picture of a folding pocket knife that they each had. They each had similar picture of trees. It was just the similarities were very odd. Andy Baldwin asks him, so that could be another connection between Brad Holder and Elvis Fields. Todd Click replies, we believe so, yes. Connection number 5, we were able to connect Elvis Fields to a gentleman by the name of Josh Chrisman. Josh Chrisman was originally part of a group called the American Guard. There was a Make America Great Again rally that was held in Indianapolis approximately 2016, where the American Guard and Vinlanders were together. And after that rally, they had a house party at a gentleman's house by the name of Mickey McGinley. McGinley was also a Vinlander, and he was friends with a gentleman by the name of Brian James, who was the head of the American Guard. Josh Chrisman worked for a company called Flynn Livestock, and Elvis Fields worked there also. So Jonny Messer knew Josh Chrisman, and Josh Chrisman knew Elvis Fields. He then goes on to talk about Taylor. He says, during our interview with Taylor, she had given us a cell phone of hers. Well, she had indicated that there was a cell phone of hers that contained recordings of a kidnapping that Jonny was involved in. So we obtained a search warrant to go into that cell phone and conduct a forensic exam to retrieve those recordings. Andy asks him, was it fruitful? Todd says there were recordings of Jonny Messer and another individual kidnapping an individual at gunpoint in the Indianapolis area. He said we tried to identify the victim of that kidnapping, but we were unsuccessful. So that's Taylor, Jonny Messer's ex. Now moving on to Elvis Fields' sister, his first sister, Joyce. He said we conducted several other interviews. We had spoken with Joyce, who is Elvis Fields' sister. During that interview, she confirmed that she heard Elvis make comments about things associated with the crime scene, the murder crime scene of Abby Williams and Liberty German. He said himself, Detective Murphy and Detective Ferenczi were aware of that information, and he was told by Detective Ferenczi and Detective Murphy that they were going to try and contact Unified Command to try and obtain a search warrant for the residence of Elvis Fields. Andy asks him what happened next, and Todd said, we never heard anything back. He said Detective Murphy and Detective Ferenczi were unable to give him an answer on whether or not they were authorised to get a search warrant. Andy says, so Joyce, Elvis' sister, says basically he's someone involved in the crime and you weren't able to secure a search warrant of any type. Todd Click says that is correct. Next, we have Elvis Fields and his spit. Andy Baldwin asks, did you ever hear Elvis Fields say anything where he was involved in this crime as part of your investigation? Todd Click says, Elvis did not say anything to me directly. Andy asks him, did he say anything to Kevin Murphy? And Todd says, back in February of 2018, I believe Jerry Holeman and Kevin Murphy interviewed Elvis Fields at the Rushville Police Department. And when Detective Murphy took Elvis Fields back to his trailer, Elvis approached Detective Murphy and said, hey, if my spit is found on those girls and I've got a reason for why it's there, I'll be okay, correct? Andy then again asks him, was this information relayed back to Unified Command? Todd says he thinks so because he knows information from another sister started the whole investigation into Elvis Fields. And then he's asked, what's that about? Well, who's that sister? And that's Elvis's sister, Mary. Todd said, Elvis had made some statements to his sister Mary. I don't recall, it's not exactly all the words that he used, but he had told Mary that he was going away for a while. He had done something bad to some girls. He was on a high bridge, that they had placed sticks on one of the girls' hair to represent antlers, and that he was in a gang and he had a brother now. So it was this statement that initially prompted the investigators to look at Elvis Fields. So Todd Click stopped working on a Delphi case when Detective Ferenczi was shot and killed outside an FBI office. He later retires. When Richard Allen is arrested, that is the next time he does anything in relation to the Delphi case. Andy Baldwin asks him what he did. He says, I eventually contacted a friend of mine who was a former prosecutor and was a criminal defence attorney. He's asked why did he do that? And Todd Click says, after Richard Allen was arrested, I was initially kind of shocked and confused. I read the affidavit, the probable cause affidavit for the arrest, and I felt like the investigative information that Detective Ferenczi, Detective Murphy and I had compiled was more compelling than what was contained within the probable cause affidavit for Richard Allen's arrest. So he didn't know what to do. He was worried that the prosecutor, Nick McClelland, didn't have all the information, so he met his attorney and he drafted a letter to the prosecutor's office. And he's asked why he did this, and he says, just to make sure that they were aware of the investigative work that Detective Murphy, Detective Ferenczi and I had conducted. So that was April 29th. He sent them a letter and he sent them a lot of his investigative materials. And he didn't hear from them until 4 months later. He said, I was contacted by Mr. Mullins of Mr. McClelland's office, and it was mid-August, I believe, of 2023. He wanted to set up a meeting with me, Detective Holeman, and asked that I provide all of my investigative materials, which would include police reports, audio-video recordings of interviews, and then they told me that they would sit down with me and go over some of the evidence that they had against Mr. Allen to try and put my mind at ease. He said, I went to Indiana State Police Post and met with the detectives, Mr. Holeman and Mr. Vido, I believe. I provided them with everything that I had. I provided them with a thumb drive that contained all the interviews that was conducted. I believe there was some cell phone extraction data that was included in that, like my audio and video interviews. And then I sat down with Detective Vido for approximately an hour or so and just kind of gave a brief summary of the investigative work that Detective Pharmacy, Detective Murphy and I completed. Andy asks him, did they seem interested in your investigative efforts? Todd says, in my opinion, no. Andy asks, you said you were there because you were, how was it you phrased it, you were concerned. Part of it was that they were going to show me evidence against Mr. Allen to help put my mind at ease. And then Andy asks, did they do that? Todd says, no sir. Andy then asks him what happened after the meeting, and Todd said, I left the state police post. As I was walking out, I noticed Brad Holder sitting in the front lobby. I went out to my car and drove back to Rushville. Andy says, after you drove back to Rushville, how often, if ever, did anybody from law enforcement contact you about what you had just provided them? Todd says, I was never contacted. So Todd was never contacted again, but he did initiate contact again. He contacted Detective Holeman. Why did he do that? Todd said, shortly after the Franks memorandum had been released, I was contacted by a friend of mine that stated that a female by the name of Alycia, who had a child with Jonny Messer, had a cell phone of Johnny's that she believed I might be interested in. Andy asks him, were you aware during the course of your investigation, before you kind of got off the investigation, of a phone that you would have liked to have had? Todd says, yes. We searched for several cell phones belonging to Jonny Messer that Johnny would have been using during the time that Abby and Libby would have been killed. We actually refer to that cell phone as the Goldilocks cell phone. We believe there might have been information contained on that cell phone. And this cell phone was the cell phone, allegedly, that Jonny Messer had in 2017. So Todd obviously thinks this is very important and he contacts Detective Holeman. He then says, I checked in with Alycia. When I spoke with Detective Holeman, I explained to him the significance that we felt the cell phone provided. Detective Holeman said that he would make arrangements to obtain that cell phone. I contacted Alycia and told her that Detective Holeman from the State Police would be contacting her to retrieve the cell phone. After approximately 2 weeks, I contacted Alycia just to make sure that the cell phone had been recovered by the State Police, and it had not been. So Todd was obviously a bit confused, I'd say, and disappointed by this. Andy asks him what he did next, and he says, at the time I contacted Brian Alvey, who's an investigator for your defence team, advised him of the cell phone, and he went out and retrieved the cell phone. So the defence team has the Goldilocks cell phone. And at the time of recording this video, we have no idea what was found on that phone. There was no mention of a female. There was no mention of another kidnapping. There was a lot of females mentioned, but they were all sisters and ex-girlfriends and ex-wives. So I think that's where a lot of the confusion came from people who were in the court and were frantically trying to take notes so we can get information. So that's it. That's Todd Click's testimony. That covers the 14 points that I laid out at the start of this video. If you have any questions, let me know. Please give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. Share it with a friend if you found any value in it. And please subscribe if you haven't. Good luck. God bless. I hope everyone has a nice day.